We're beginning a new series on what's called Aggadah in the Talmud. The Aggadahs are the cryptic stories and riddles that are interspersed throughout all the different Jewish laws that are discussed in the Talmud, and they exist to serve a very important purpose. The word Aggadah, by way of introduction, does anyone know how to spell Aggadah? Aleph, Gimel, Daled, Hey. Okay, Aggadah, Aleph, Gimel, Daled, Hey. So who can tell me what's interesting about this word here, made up of its component letters?
It's an alphabetical order.
It is in alphabetical order. And which alphabetical order?
Hebrew.
Yes. But specifically, which letters is he using?
It's the beginning letters.
The first letters, without the bet. It's all of the first 5 letters of the alphabet, except it's missing the bet. And this is actually, the Zohar says, this is actually teaching us what Aggadah is for. Aggadah is a story that's missing a crucial piece of information, and you're supposed to read through it and say, wait a minute, where's the bet? And then the teacher is supposed to say, aha, that's how we learn. That's how Jews learn something and integrate information, is not by being spoon-fed knowledge, but rather being told something that you have to use your mind to unlock the missing piece. Isn't that amazing? So that's what Aggadah is, and that's what we're going to learn over the next few weeks, these stories that on their face either seem to be nonsensical or simple to the point of sounding almost stupid. And what we're meant to do is to say these were very intelligent people who were passing on this information, and there was clearly something that they wanted us to get, but they didn't want to tell us in the direct way. For 2 reasons. One, because it's a more useful didactic tool. It helps us to learn better. But second of all, because usually the things that it's teaching are quite deep. And they did not want to reveal all of the secrets. We have to work for it. So the first one that I want to teach, and I apologize if there's anybody in the room tonight that has heard this before, because it's one that I really enjoy speaking about, is one of the more famous stories in the Medrash. The Medrash is part of the Oral Torah. It's there to accompany the Chumash and the Tanakh and to give an additional piece of information or add in extra parts of the story where it seems to be sparse. And this one happens to be speaking at a moment in the Torah that introduces Abraham for the first time. Now, what's strange about Abraham's introduction in the Torah is that he actually has no introduction in the Torah. It goes directly from Noah and then the descendants of Noah, and then mentions one thing about Abraham being the son of Terach, and then in the next parsha, in Parshas Lech Lecha, it says, and God spoke to this dude, Abraham, and we have no idea who he is. Compare that to the previous major character that we have in the Torah, Noah, and he's introduced as a tzaddik, tamim, bedorah, right? He was a wise, righteous person. Abraham, nothing. We know nothing about him. And so the Medrash says, well, who is this guy? What made him worthy of being spoken to? And that's what this story is seeking to answer. So, I'm going to pass this around. You guys are going to have to do some of the work tonight. Hopefully we're going to try to do that every week. I don't want to just spoon feed you. I'd like you to try to figure it out on your own. So the Medrash, how are we doing? We good? The Midrash Rabbah. So this is meant to be an interjection. Right before God says, Lech Lecha, right before God says, go for yourself, Hashem said to Avram, go for yourself from your land, etc. Said Rabbi Yitzchak, let us compare this to someone who is traveling from place to place and saw a palace that was dolekes. I'm not going to translate that word yet, and you'll see in a moment why. He saw a palace, that was dolekes. He said, is it possible that this palace has no director, no proprietor? The owner of the palace peered out to him and said to him, I'm the owner of the palace. So too, since Abraham, our father, said, is it possible that this world has no director, nobody running the place? Hashem peered out to him and said to him, I am the master of the world. I'm the owner, really, of the world. Okay. I need you to take a minute, pair up with the person next to you, and come up with as many questions as you can on this text. What information is missing? What seems not to make sense? Is there anything that needs clarification? This is how we approach a Jewish text. 1, 2, 3, go. Let's come back. I'm hearing some good questions here. So who wants to share? Who would like to offer up any questions that they might have on this text?
I think we were asking it. It says there are 3 questions, which
Yes.
Is it possible that this palace has no director?
Mm-hmm.
And then the answer is the owner of the palace peered out to him and said, I'm the owner of this palace, whereas director and owner are 2 different things.
Fantastic. So this traveler is asking who's directing. The word in Hebrew is manhig. So if you are on if you ever have the terrifying experience of being on a Jerusalem bus, and he whisks past your stop without stopping, you say, Nahag, delit, right? Driver, the door. So the manhig is the director, the person who's running the place. So the traveler asks, is there any director here? And the owner comes out and says, I'm the owner. So what's the difference between a director and an owner? Great question. What else?
Well, then there's also the difference of that Avram asks, is it possible that the world has no director?
Yes.
Suggesting there's a difference between owner and director.
Yes.
And then Hashem peered out and said, I'm the master of the world.
Yeah, okay. So here, I guess
That's the third difference.
we can chalk that up to poor translation. So in the Hebrew, it's the same word, right? The Baal Habira and the Baal Ha'olam. That I will, for future reference, change the English so that it doesn't trip people up. But it's a good point, and I appreciate the copy editing on my source sheet. But yes, it's exactly parallel in the Hebrew. The owner of the palace and the owner, so to speak, of the world. Any other questions?
I guess why would that analogy concerning the palace would apply to the world?
Excellent. What is the analogy of a palace to the world? What do those two have to do with each other? You could say anything and compare it to the world. A plant, I don't know.
Fishing boat.
What?
Fishing boat.
A fishing boat, an animal, whatever.
Palace suggests that royalty lives there.
Okay, so we'll get to answers in a minute, but so far we've collected 2 questions. Number 1, what is the incongruency between director and owner? And number 2 is what's the comparison between a palace and the world? What's the obvious question?
Meaning of delek.
What does delekis mean? I put that in Hebrew, and we'll see that it's actually going to, the entire piece is going to hinge on that word. So let's get into it. The word delekis, does anyone, when they hear the word dolek, does it remind them of another word that comes up in their Jewish practice? Yes? Or in any recent memory?
Is it in a where it's burning or something?
Where might you have heard this word?
From petrol.
From your what?
Is it in
Oh, from petrol.
Hebrew?
Delek
Delek.
is
That's
petrol.
what I was
Very
thinking,
good.
burning.
That's right, exactly.
Petrol.
But it's to light, to strike a match.
So, for example, when do we use this word?
Like candlelight.
Lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. So lahadlik is the same word as dolek, right? So to light something up, right? To light a candle. So the first way of understanding this word delekis is that Avraham, or the traveler, is going from place to place and sees a palace that was lit up. It was lit up. It's all the lights are on. And he passes this palace and he says, well, that's strange. All the lights are on. Well, there must be somebody directing this palace because it's so well lit. Okay? So that's one way of understanding it. And then obviously the owner comes out and says, don't worry, I'm taking care of things here. Trust me, I've got everything under control. There's another way of understanding the word delekis, however. If you look at the next source, I've quoted in the book of Ovadiah, which interestingly is Oh, it's a different person. Obadiah is one of the prophets in the books of prophets, right? So the book of Obadiah is part of the written Torah, and he gives an analogy. The house of Jacob shall be fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. It's a very fascinating verse because essentially Joseph is the extension of his father. And the house of Esav shall become stubble, and they shall dalku. They shall ignite them and burn them down. And the house of Esav shall have no survivors, for the Lord has spoken. So, if we understand dolek meaning to light up, to burn up, how does that change the meaning of this story?
And this palace is on fire.
The palace is on fire. It's not lit up. It's literally blazing to the ground. And then Abraham comes upon this palace and he says, well, what the heck is going on here? This beautiful palatial structure is on fire. Who's in charge? Well, that's a very, very different read to the story, right? So I want to explore, what is this saying about Abraham's encounter with the world? We have an analogy between the world and a palace. And this palace is either beautifully lit or it's scorching, blazing to the ground. What's the difference? What do these two stories imply about Abraham's perception of the world?
He looks at the world and he sees chaos, or he looks at the world and he deduces that there needs to be someone who organizes the chaos, or he looks at the world and he sees harmony, therefore from the harmony he deduces God.
Now that's a drastically different interpretation, isn't it? There's two ways we can perceive Abraham's his intellectual journey in discovering God. The first one is that he looks around the world and it's like the famous watchmaker's argument. You've heard of this? One of the ancient philosophical arguments for the existence of God is that if you look around the world, it's so perfect, it's so harmonious, the laws of physics are like clockwork. It's almost like coming upon a immaculately made clock in the middle of the desert and say that this clock fashioned itself. And as unlikely as that is, the ancient philosophers say, that's how unlikely it is that the universe would have put itself together. Okay? Whether or not we agree on the merits of that argument, that could be the way that we read this story, is that Abraham's looking at the world and he says, wow, the beauty, the harmony, the color, everything. It connotes that there's somebody who's got to be taking care of this place, because there's no way that this could be self-run and self-governed. And then all of a sudden God comes out and says, surprise, I am he. And in a sense, this is explaining Abraham's journey and why he merited to be the person that God spoke to. That seemingly nobody else was able to come to the logical conclusion that if you look around at the world and see all the harmony and order, there's got to be a singular force or being behind all of it.
If you take it in the other way, that it says it's on fire.
Yes.
Then the word, if it's a director, it means he's directing everything, but we believe we have free will. So if he owns it but doesn't direct.
Wait, we'll get to direction and own in a minute, okay? You're heading in a good direction. I like the direction you're going in, but I want to take it step by step. What does Abraham perceive if we understand that dolekis means burning to the ground? What does he see in the world? How does he look at the world? He sees destruction. Now, it's not just any old destruction, because the world is a palace. And we were asking, what's the comparison between a palace and the world? And frankly, you could say there is a lot of order and a lot of beauty in the world. There is inherent structure in nature. The laws of physics are, as far as we understand, pretty immutable. And the things that happen in the universe, like clockwork, every year the trees bloom, they shed their leaves and then hibernate, and then they come back out again. And it's really quite amazing. It's quite incredible. So there is something palatial about the world, but there's also a lot of destruction and a lot of chaos and a lot of human beings murdering other human beings and a lot of lions eating gazelles. And you could look at the universe and say, oh my God, who let this run amok? Somebody obviously created it, but the revelation is now not oh, there must be a grand designer behind everything. It's that, why would the grand designer leave it all to go to heck? That's the real question that Abraham is asking. And what's amazing is that if you look at the question, he asks, is it possible that this palace has no director? It really takes on two different shapes, depending on whether you understand Delekis as lit up or on fire. Because the first one is it possible that this palace, such a beautiful, amazing palace, has no director? There's got to be somebody who built this thing and is running this thing. It's so immaculate. As opposed to, is it possible that this place has no director? Could you imagine somebody building some magical mansion that's thousands of square feet and then just leaving it to rot and to ruin and to burn down to the ground? It's amazing how the whole thing turns on its head depending on our perception of the word Delekis. Now, it's my contention, and not just my contention, but the contention of people much greater than me, that this word was left intentionally ambiguous. There's no way that you could easily construct this story in a way that's a lot more straightforward, such that you're making it clear that it's either lit up or it's burning down to the ground. But intentionally, this word was chosen in order to carry both interpretations. And what that is suggesting is that it's making a very profound observation about the universe. Is that there's actually two ways of looking at the universe, and there's two ways of coming to the understanding that there must be a God. The first one is very straightforward. It's the watchmaker's argument. It's, I can't believe such an amazing thing exists. There has to be somebody behind it. There must be some designer behind it all. And that's the first way of reading it. The second way of understanding it is that it's because of the chaos that I can understand that there's a creator. And that's much more difficult to understand. So I want to take a minute to unpack that. There has been for a very long time an opinion about the universe that it is eternal. So the Greek philosophers, some of the Muslim philosophers held that the universe, the world, is eternal. There was no creation to the universe. Now, the thing about an eternal universe is that something that is forever old is something. I'll put it in these words. Something that has no beginning can't really have a middle or an end. Something that is eternal, that is timeless, should be unchanging. Does that ring a chord with you? If you think of the things that are the most enduring, a diamond, for example, of course, over thousands and thousands of years, it does change. It goes from coal to a diamond. But the things that seem to be the most timeless are the things that are the least changing. Now, one could look at the world and say, this world is not the type of world that I would expect if it were infinitely old. The fact that it's in flux means that there's movement in the world. It's going through progression. And anything that has progression suggests that there was a beginning point and it's now moving towards something else. So Abraham looks around at the world and he says, hold on a second. There's got to be a creator to it all, because whoever kicked this off, who gave it all the potential energy for it to even be capable of burning? The word burning, dolekis, whether it means lit up or whether it means to be ablaze or whether it means petrol, in any case, it means that it has a lot of potential. There's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of movement. Now, this is perfectly encapsulated by one other moment that the Torah uses the word delekis to mean a third meaning. If you look in Bereshis, in Genesis, the last source on this sheet, Jacob has run away from Lavan, his quite evil father-in-law, and Lavan pursues him and catches up with him, and Jacob was annoyed. He was angry, actually, and he quarreled with Lavan, and he said to Lavan, "What is my transgression? Why am I guilty? What is my sin that you have pursued me?" Guess what the word pursued is? Dalakta. exactly the same root as dolek. Because dolek actually means movement. It means that there's energy here. It's going towards something. When you light something up, you're demonstrating all of the energy that was hidden inside of whatever it is that you're lighting. That's really what dolek means. So what Abraham sees in the bigger picture is a universe in flux. And he says there's no way that a timeless, eternal universe could be like this. There had to have been somebody who started this. My only question is he still here? So there was a school of religious thought called deism. You know what deism is? Ever heard of the deists? Apparently a lot of the founding fathers of the United States were deists. Deism is the suggestion that there was a God, and still is a God, who created the universe, but he kind of left it to its own devices. So he created it, but I guess he got bored or something. Or as Aristotle would say, he created it, but he's so far removed from the creation, it's impossible that a perfect being could actually have anything to do with the universe. Now, the Jewish God is not like that. We have an understanding that God is intimately involved in the universe, which is exactly what Abraham discovers here. And the discovery is not that there's a God, according to this alternate understanding. Of course there's a God. The question is he still running the place? Now, what's amazing is that Abraham, to get to your question, what's the difference between a director and an owner? Well, let me ask you. What's the difference between a director and an owner? So, Emily, you were gonna say something, so now go for it.
Well, no, an owner doesn't have control over what happens.
Okay.
So if speaking about with God, if he owns the world or the universe, he doesn't necessarily have a say in the way that it's run, because we believe we have free will. So even though he owns it and he knows what's going on,
Interesting.
he doesn't necessarily have a say in.
So interesting. You're suggesting that what God's answer is that, look, I'm not necessarily directing it, but I own the place. Okay, I like that. I find that very interesting. Anyone else? Any other suggestions? Yeah, difference between an owner and a director.
The owner might be, let's say, someone that owns the building, like, let's say, financially or legally the building is in their name, but they might employ a director or like a ground crew or someone to actually look after the building and take care of the day-to-day running and the sort of everything that goes on.
So Zeus is the director, but God is the... No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking. So
Like,
he's saying that I'm...
Whoever owns the head office
Okay,
building doesn't
yeah.
run
So similar to what Emily's saying is that the owner is more of a hands-off type of job.
Then there's also the element of an owner funds the operation.
Yes.
So appoints people.
Yeah.
So I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you also look at it in the reverse. It's like a director, someone like in the context of like a play or something. The director could have been behind the scenes, you know, orchestrating everything that's going to happen and like with all the rehearsals and like getting everyone ready for it, and behind the scenes running it. But on the ground, the people that own it, they're owning their own actions.
Okay.
Does that make? I don't know.
Yeah.
In the reverse.
Great.
It's maybe it's just my interpretation of it.
That's all I'm asking.
Hashem, Avram says, has this world no director? Hashem doesn't answer that. He evades the question. It's sort of like he's saying, well, I'm the master. So I put everyone here. I did all of this.
He's clearly giving a different answer.
But I'm
from
not
the question.
responsible for what's happening. It's almost like saying, well, it's almost like Avram's asking, like, who's leading this? Like, who's in charge?
Yeah.
Who's the person who's actively here? And God said, well, I created it. I put everything in place.
But I'm leaving it alone.
I'm not taking ownership for the free will of what you have done.
Okay.
And that sort of then, I suppose, puts Avram in that leadership place, because the fact that he's
Very nice.
the only one who's asking, it almost goes like, when we're talking about the interpretation of Daleka, if Avram is looking at it and going, oh my gosh, what has happened, where's the director?
Yes.
In a way it means that everyone else in the universe is okay with the destruction that they've seen, and they're like, yeah, this is fine, this is normal, it's on fire every other week. They're not observing it, they're not looking at it, they're not questioning it, they don't see anything wrong.
Yeah.
Like the people in Sodom, like they don't see
Good,
the issue.
amazing, good.
So Avram looks at it and goes, why? Something's going on here. Why has no one else said that?
Great.
Who's running the show? And God said, oh, well, I own it, but no one's running it.
Okay, good. So I think a lot of people are in the Amelie camp here, right? Which is that director means hands-on, owner means hands-off. Now, what's fascinating to me is that the conventional way of interpreting this, as seen through the scholars of the ages, is the opposite. And I'll explain what I mean, although there's something that you mentioned that I want to pull on that thread in a minute. A director is somebody who is, as you said, employed to maintain something that already exists. So there was also a common understanding amongst those who said that the universe is eternal, that there is a God, but there's also a universe. And so God's relationship to the universe is simply a director. He didn't create the place, but he's running the place. But he's also bound to some higher authority, because if he didn't create the universe, then he can't destroy the universe and he can't change the laws of the universe. So a lot of religious movements have suggested that God is restricted to the laws of nature because the universe precedes God, or at least as old as God. However, if you say that God comes before everything else, then God's not just a director, he's the owner of the place. He created it, which means that he has a different role. A director can come and go as he pleases, but at the end of the day, he's not really financially responsible for the property. But an owner would never allow his or her property to burn down. An owner would say, trust me, I have a financial interest in what happens to this palace. So don't think that there's merely a director who just took his hands off the wheel for a minute. No. I am intimately concerned with the outcome of this building. I will never let this building burn for no reason at all. And that's what God is answering Abraham. Now, I like this idea of God saying, I'm the owner, but maybe I want you to direct it, which is a really cool idea. I like that idea. So, and ultimately, that's what God is going to tell Abraham, is Lech Lecha, go. I need you to be my agent in this universe. There's one other thing that you said, which is really interesting, which is that a lot of other people didn't really care about the chaos, which is yet another way of understanding the counter-argument to what Abraham was saying. So in a pre-monotheistic world, and I may have spoken about this before, in a pre-monotheistic world where everything is eternal, you may not necessarily say, an eternal universe should be unchanging. An eternal universe should be like a diamond. But you would say that an eternal universe is unchanging in the sense that it's a perpetual cycle. So the ancient way of understanding time was cyclical, which meant that things are born, they die, they're reborn, they die, and so on forever. In the same way that in a snapshot of a human lifetime, you would see nature simply repeating itself. You would have to have an awareness of evolution or the scheme of thousands of years to realize that there is actually movement in history. So too, the ancients understood that things are in flux and there's war and chaos all the time. And you know what? That's life. That's part of the wonderful circle of life that we all like to sing when we watch Disney movies. And it's like, yes, the lion eats the gazelle, and that's just the way it is.
Would you not say that our universe is cyclical?
It is cyclical, but it's cyclical within a larger pattern of movement. So the Jewish understanding of time is more like a spiral than a cycle. So it's constantly coming back on itself, but it is slowly moving in a particular direction.
I'm just thinking in terms of if you apply it to like the way that we're living now in terms of anti-Semitism.
Oh yeah.
And what we're told over generations.
Things come and come back and come back and come back. But today the Jewish people are not where we were 2,000 years ago. We would like to think that we're a bit further along. And in a certain sense, humanity is further along. I reject the idea that we're living in the worst times in history. especially amongst the female members of this group here, I would bet anything to say that you would rather be living in the present than almost any other time in history.
But spiritually, they'll find out.
Okay, so spiritually, right, there is something to talk about. Although even there, the access, today there are more people in the world learning Torah than there have ever been in history. So say what you will. Now, you're right, there are certainly fluctuations, and there are pendulums that are swinging. But if you think of the world as an endless cycle, then war and destruction and chaos and things burning to the ground are a regular part of society. Abraham understood that there must be some point to it all. How could it be that this is the natural state of the world? It's impossible to think that way. And so Abraham said, where are we going? And God peers out and he says, you solved the riddle. It's not supposed to be this way. Someone's got to fix it. You want the job. So that's ultimately why Abraham deserves to be the person that God speaks to. So I love this story because, first of all, it's incredibly layered. And you see how much depth is contained within a few short sentences. When we start to ask the right questions and unlock the right doors, then all of a sudden an incredible amount of information becomes available to us. And now we've unlocked some of the secrets of how a person can look at the universe, whether because of its harmonious properties or because of its destructive and chaotic properties, that we can begin to see that there's something deeper going on either way. And that's exactly what Abraham did. So this is Aggadah. It's an incredible, incredible journey. There's some fantastic stories that I'll be covering in the next few weeks. So if you want to keep going on this magical journey, you're welcome to tag along. But it's lovely to see you, and see you next time.